They wore black. But this wasn't a funeral. It was a celebration. The husband stood beside his mistress, calm, relieved, almost smiling, because the woman they both wanted gone, the wife they thought was finished, was finally dead. Or so they believed. Everything was going exactly as planned. A tragic death, fake tears, and a future without obstacles. The husband imagined total freedom. The mistress imagined power, money, and control. But then the doctor closed the file, looked up and spoke one sentence. A sentence that froze the room and shattered their victory. Because the woman they were secretly celebrating was alive. And not just alive. She was the boss. The true owner. The woman who had been watching everything in silence. Hello, dear listeners. Thank you for joining me today. Before I begin my story, I would be very happy if you subscribed to the channel and left a comment writing which state or country you are listening from. It always warms my heart to see how far our stories travel. So now, let me tell you this story. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Before the death. My name is Evelyn Carter. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, a city that looks strong on the outside but hides countless broken hearts behind its brick walls. People who see me now would never guess what I've endured. They see confidence, elegance, control. But this story doesn't begin with power. It begins with silence. I used to believe marriage was a partnership, that love meant loyalty, that promises meant protection. I was wrong. When I married Daniel Carter, I thought I had found a man who saw me, not my background, not my intelligence, not my ambition, just me. He was charming, ambitious, and endlessly persuasive. The kind of man who could make you feel safe while quietly learning where you keep the keys. In the early years, Daniel would hold my hand and say, "Evelyn, one day we'll build something big. Together." And we did. But not in the way I imagined. I came from nothing. A single mother who cleaned offices at night raised me. I studied on scholarships, slept 4 hours a night, and learned early that the world does not reward kindness, only strategy. By 32, I had built a company quietly, carefully, in someone else's name. That someone was my husband. I let Daniel be the face, the charming CEO, the man the board trusted. I stayed in the shadows by choice. Because power, real power, works best when no one sees it coming. But Daniel changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. He began coming home late. His phone was always on silent, and the warmth in his eyes faded into calculation. One night, as I stood in the kitchen holding a cup of cold tea, I asked softly, "Is there someone else?" He didn't answer. Silence can be louder than confession. Her name was Lydia. I didn't meet her at first. I felt her. In the sudden distance. In the way Daniel avoided my gaze. In how he spoke about freedom and new beginnings. She was younger. Louder. Hungry for status. Everything Daniel thought he deserved. By then, my health had begun to fail. The stress. The long nights. The weight of carrying an empire no one knew I owned. One morning, I collapsed in my office. The doctors said the words slowly, carefully, as if volume could soften them. Internal complications. Severe exhaustion. High risk. Daniel stood beside the hospital bed, arms crossed. No fear.
No tears.
Just calculation. 2 weeks later, he asked me to sign documents. "Just in case," he said. "In case something happens." I smiled weakly and signed. Because I trusted him. Because love blinds even the smartest minds. Then came the night, everything changed. I remember rain hitting the windshield as Daniel drove too fast. I remember Lydia's perfume in the air, strong, unfamiliar. I remember the sudden pain. And then darkness. When I woke up, machines beeped softly around me. A doctor leaned close and whispered, "You're alive, but officially you won't be." They explained it all. The attempted cover-up. The staged death. The insurance. The transfer of control. Daniel had already moved on. With Lydia. With my life. With my company. And that's when I made my decision. If the world believed Evelyn Carter was dead, Then the woman who returned would not be a wife. She would not be forgiving. She would be the boss. The day I died. They announced my death on a Tuesday morning. The news anchor spoke my name with rehearsed sadness, as if my life could be reduced to a 30-second headline. Businesswoman Evelyn Carter passed away late last night after complications from a sudden medical emergency. No mention of the struggle. No mention of the sacrifices. No mention of the truth. Just death. Daniel cried perfectly. He stood before cameras dressed in black, his voice breaking at all the right moments. "I've lost my best friend," he said, pressing a hand to his chest. I watched it all from a hospital room that officially didn't exist. The nurse beside me whispered, "He's convincing." I closed my eyes. "Yes," I said softly. "He always is." The funeral was held 3 days later. A private cemetery on the outskirts of Boston. Gray skies. Cold wind. Black umbrellas. I wasn't there, but everything I had built was. My name carved into marble. Flowers stacked high, sent by people who never truly knew me. Board members. Investors. Politicians. And, standing at the center of it all, Daniel. And Lydia. She wore black too. But there was nothing mournful about her posture. Her hand rested comfortably on my husband's arm, not subtly, not accidentally, possessively, as if the ground beneath my grave already belonged to her. Inside a black SUV parked far from the crowd, I watched the live stream. Every word spoken about me felt unreal. She was kind. She was generous. She was devoted to her marriage. I almost laughed. What no one mentioned was how quickly Daniel had taken control. Within 48 hours of my death, he had assumed full executive authority. Emergency meetings, legal signatures, quiet transfers. All the doors I had opened for him, he walked through without looking back. Lydia moved into my house the same night as the funeral. My house, the place where I once believed love lived. The security footage showed her wandering through the rooms, touching my things, wearing my robe, sleeping in my bed. Daniel watched her with satisfaction, as if he had finally claimed a prize. "You did it," Lydia whispered to him that night. "It's finally ours." Daniel smiled. "No," he corrected her. "It's finally mine." What neither of them knew was that the documents I signed were incomplete, that the company structure was layered, protected, and designed for betrayal, that every move Daniel made triggered alerts only one person could see. Me. From the shadows, I watched my empire breathe. Every transaction, every decision, every lie. And the more confident Daniel became, the more careless he grew. The doctors told me I needed time. "You're weak," they said. "Your body has been through trauma." They were right. But weakness is a phase, and survival is a skill. I spent my days recovering, my nights planning, learning who stayed silent, who celebrated too quickly, who underestimated a woman they thought was buried. Because death had given me something marriage never did. Clarity. Daniel didn't love me. He loved what I provided. Lydia didn't want him. She wanted my life. And both of them believed the same lie, that I was gone. I stood before a mirror one night, touching the scar on my wrist. "Evelyn Carter is dead," I whispered. Then I looked into my own eyes and said, "But the boss is just getting started." Silent observation. The world thought I was dead. Daniel thought he had won. Lydia thought she had claimed a kingdom. And for a moment, everything seemed perfectly real. But shadows never lie. And silence always speaks the truth. I stayed in the hospital room that no one officially knew existed. Machines beeped softly. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint perfume of lilies someone had left outside. A reminder of funerals, of endings, of beginnings I had yet to plan. Every day I watched them. Daniel in board meetings. Lydia decorating my house. Laughing in rooms where I had laughed first. Claiming the spaces I had built from scratch. I learned quickly who they trusted, who they feared, and who they underestimated. And that list included everyone. Except me. I was invisible. But that invisibility was my weapon. I began to take notes. Small things. Tiny things. Daniel's arrogance. Lydia's impatience. Their overconfidence. It was almost beautiful how blind they had become. Almost. Daniel threw himself into work. Board members complimented him. Investors congratulated him. Everyone believed the woman who had built the empire was gone. No one knew she was still breathing. No one knew she was watching. No one knew how carefully, quietly, she would take everything back. One evening, I overheard them speaking in my own living room. "She won't be a problem anymore," Lydia said, smiling. Daniel nodded, sipping his drink.
Exactly.
Finally, the way it should be. And I felt it. The first spark of true fury. Not blind rage, but calm, precise, unstoppable fury. I began preparing for the moment they would least expect. Meetings would be manipulated. Contracts subtly rewritten. All paths leading back to me. And yet, I had to wait. Patience had become my ally. Time was my weapon. And my silence was their downfall in disguise. At night, I lay in my hospital bed and whispered to the dark. "You thought Evelyn Carter was dead. You thought she could be erased. But the boss sees everything." The irony of life wasn't lost on me. They had celebrated my death. They had laughed at my absence. They had touched my life as if it belonged to them. And in that laughter, I planted seeds of ruin. Because revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. And when it strikes, it's absolute. By the end of that week, I knew. Daniel and Lydia believed they were untouchable. The world believed Evelyn Carter was dead. But I was the storm they had ignored. I was the reckoning they would never forget. And when the day came, when the boss returned, they would see that what they celebrated was nothing but the beginning of their undoing. The calm before the storm. The days passed like slow-moving shadows. Outside, the city carried on. Traffic.
Crowds.
Business deals. Inside, my life had been erased. Or, at least, that's what everyone thought. Daniel moved with confidence. Every step calculated. Every smile rehearsed. He was convinced he had outsmarted me. Lydia was always by his side, whispering plans, claiming victories. I watched it all silently, recovering my strength, learning their patterns, learning their weaknesses, learning the truth that power wasn't in their arrogance, it was in my patience. In the hospital, I spent hours staring at the ceiling. The white light flickered occasionally, like a heartbeat counting down. And I realized something important. Death is not the end. It is the beginning of clarity, the beginning of precision, the beginning of revenge. I remembered the day I signed those documents, believing in love, trusting Daniel completely. I remembered the nights I worked alone, building the empire quietly, hiding in shadows. I remembered the way Lydia touched my things, thinking she had won. And I smiled, because they had made one fatal mistake. They thought the story was over. They thought Evelyn Carter could be erased. They had no idea that the real power was never visible. From my hospital room, I planned the next steps. Who would be manipulated first? Which legal loopholes would force Daniel to make mistakes? How would Lydia's overconfidence become her downfall? Every detail mattered. Every second counted. Every mistake they made would be cataloged and remembered. I practiced my smile in the mirror. Not the smile of a defeated woman. Not the smile of a weak, dying wife. The smile of the boss. And when the day came, when the world believed I was dead, they would see the truth. Because celebration is sweet, until the guest of honor returns. And I was ready. The celebration of a mistake. Daniel Carter never looked more alive. The city outside may have been gray and rainy, but inside his penthouse, the lights shone bright, and the music pulsed like victory itself. He poured himself a glass of scotch, clinking it against Lydia's sparkling crystal glass. "To new beginnings," he said, voice low, confident, smug. "To freedom," Lydia replied, smiling like a queen who had just claimed a throne. They both thought they had won. The truth was, they hadn't even realized the war had just begun. They were celebrating my death, while I watched from the shadows. Lydia laughed, a sound meant to drown out all doubt. Can you believe she's gone? She whispered, tracing her fingers along Daniel's arm. Daniel smiled, leaning closer. She was nothing compared to us. I could feel the arrogance through the walls. The very air was thick with it. And with each word, I catalogued their weakness. Every overconfident statement, every assumption, every tiny slip that would be their undoing. The boardroom had been emptied, the company offices silent. Daniel had already signed emergency control papers, taking over every aspect of my empire. Lydia's name was in legal documents now. But she didn't know how fragile her position really was. They were celebrating a life they thought ended, a life they didn't understand. Daniel poured more whiskey.
This is it, Lydia.
Finally, we can have everything. Her house, her company, her life. Lydia's smile widened. I never thought it would be this easy. Their laughter echoed through the empty penthouse. And with each echo, my plan sharpened. I had recovered enough to walk again. I could hear every footstep, every whispered plan, every smug word. And still, they didn't know. I wasn't the weak wife they had left behind. I wasn't gone. I wasn't powerless. I was patient. I was watching. I was ready. The celebration continued late into the night. Candlelight flickered against expensive furniture, throwing shadows. Across the walls, shadows that hid me, shadows that waited for the right moment to strike. Lydia danced lightly in the living room, trailing her fingers across objects I had touched. She laughed, thinking she was safe, thinking she had replaced me in every way possible. And then Daniel's phone rang. It was the hospital. The music stopped. The laughter faltered. The doctor's voice was calm but unmistakably firm. Mr. Carter, there has been a development. Your wife is alive. The words hung in the air. The room froze. The world as they knew it tilted on its axis. Lydia's face went pale. Daniel's confident posture crumbled. For the first time, they understood the reality of their arrogance. I was alive, and I had been watching all along. The celebration, the laughter, the false victory, would end tonight. The awakening of fear. The room went silent. Daniel stared at his phone like it had betrayed him. Lydia's hand froze midair, holding a crystal glass that now seemed heavier than steel. Alive, Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible, as if saying it louder might make it untrue. The doctor's calm tone came through again. Yes, Mr. Carter. Evelyn Carter is stable, conscious, and fully aware. She's awake. Lydia's face drained of all color. That's impossible, she stammered, her voice cracking. Daniel's jaw tightened. His mind raced, every plan they had made crumbling in seconds. They didn't realize the empire they thought belonged to them was never theirs. The house, the money, the control. It had always been mine. And now I was coming back. Daniel paced across the penthouse floor, muttering under his breath. How could this happen? Lydia gripped his arm, panic replacing the smug confidence she had worn like armor. We need to fix this.
Now.
No one can know she's alive. But it was too late. I had already returned. I watched from the shadowed hallway, unseen, every reaction recorded in my mind. The way Daniel's hands trembled, the way Lydia's eyes darted in fear, the way they looked at each other, realizing the foundation of their victory had been an illusion. It was intoxicating. The reality of the situation hit them like a physical blow. Daniel, who had once celebrated my death with laughter and relief, now felt the weight of his betrayal. Every lie he had told, every secret move he had made, every greedy plan, unraveling in front of his eyes. Lydia, who had paraded through my home as if she belonged, felt the terror of a usurper who had been exposed. The throne she had claimed so easily was slipping through her fingers. I stepped forward, revealing myself slowly. Not weak. Not trembling.
Strong. Calm.
Every step deliberate. Hello, I said softly. The sound of my voice stopped their panic cold. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came out. Lydia's smile died instantly, replaced with sheer, raw fear. I wasn't the woman they had left behind. I wasn't the broken wife. I was the boss. You thought I was gone. I continued, my tone cold, almost surgical. You thought you could celebrate my absence and take everything I built. But everything you see belongs to me. And now you will understand what happens when the boss returns. Daniel's hands shook. Lydia sank into a chair, gripping the arms like a lifeline. Neither of them had expected this. Neither of them had imagined the consequences of their arrogance. From that moment on, the dynamics had changed. The hunter had become the prey. The celebration had become panic. The smugness had become terror. And I had only just begun. The silent reclamation, the penthouse, once a temple of their victory, now felt like a cage. Daniel stood frozen near the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the city lights as if they could offer him salvation. Lydia sat on the sofa, trembling, trying to organize her thoughts, but the panic in her mind overpowered logic. I entered the room with calm precision. Every step deliberate. Every movement a statement. They were not just scared, they were terrified. "I see you've made yourselves comfortable," I said softly. Daniel's jaw clenched. Lydia's eyes widened. Disbelief etched across her face. You can't," Daniel began, but I cut him off with a look. "Can't what? You already tried to erase me. You already celebrated my death. Now, you will see what happens when the boss comes back." The first step of my plan was visibility. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to threaten. All I needed was control. Within hours, I sent quiet memos to the board. Not emails with demands, but subtle reminders of contracts, signatures, and legal clauses only I could enforce. Every message was a dagger masked as civility. Daniel read them first, confusion growing into panic. Lydia followed, realizing the documents she thought were hers were legally null. You can't do this," Daniel shouted, pacing like a cornered animal. I leaned against the marble counter, arms crossed.
Calm, composed.
"You already did," I said. "You signed papers under false pretenses. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I was dead. But you forgot one thing: everything I built, every contract, every layer of protection, was mine all along." Lydia's hands shook as she tried to pick up her phone. "Maybe we can negotiate," she whispered. I tilted my head, amused. Negotiation? When they had celebrated my death. When they had laughed in the funeral of my absence.
No.
Negotiation wasn't possible anymore. Over the next few days, I tightened my grip. Board members who supported Daniel quietly received my instructions. Investors who had been fooled into believing he was in charge were reminded of reality. Employees who had doubted my absence were shown the truth. And Daniel? He became desperate. Every confident move he made only played into my plan. Lydia? She spiraled further into fear, realizing she had no power, no allies, and no future without me. One evening, Daniel tried to confront me. You're ruining everything," he shouted. I smiled. Calm, cold, and unshakable. "Everything you thought was yours was never yours. And the empire you tried to steal is mine. Every last piece." For the first time, he understood the magnitude of his mistake. Lydia's tears fell silently, while Daniel's mind raced for solutions that didn't exist. And I watched it all unfold, savoring the inevitable. The lesson was clear. Power is not taken by arrogance. Power is claimed through patience, precision, and planning. Daniel and Lydia had celebrated too soon. They had assumed I was gone. And in doing so, they had handed me the tools for their complete downfall. By the end of that week, the penthouse, once filled with laughter and celebration, was silent. Except for the faint, echoing reminder of who truly ruled. The boss. The boss returns. The penthouse was cold, silent, and tense. Daniel and Lydia sat across from me, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. Gone were the smirks, the laughter, the arrogance. Now, only fear remained. I stepped forward slowly, every step measured, deliberate. "My name is Evelyn Carter," I said, voice low but steady. "The woman you thought was dead, the woman you celebrated, is alive. And she's here to collect what's hers." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, But no words came out. Lydia's hands trembled in her lap. I see you've been busy, I continued, my eyes scanning the room. You've signed papers, taken meetings, touched my home, but all of it belongs to me. Everything. Every piece. Every decision. Every asset. All mine. And now, it's time to face reality. Daniel's voice broke finally, desperation leaking through. You can't do this. You're dead. Everyone thinks. Everyone thinks. I interrupted, leaning slightly forward. You thought my death would erase me? You thought my empire would be yours by default? Look around. Look at yourselves. You celebrated a grave that wasn't even mine. You laughed at my absence. And now, the joke's on you. Lydia's tears fell freely. I didn't know, she stammered. I smiled faintly, coldly. You didn't know? That's the problem, Lydia. You never understood. You never saw me. You thought taking what I had would make you powerful. But power isn't given, and it isn't stolen. It's earned and preserved. And I preserved it, while you danced on my grave. Daniel's hands shook. He realized every misstep he had made, every overconfident move, every false assumption, and the weight of it crushed him. I walked past them, standing tall. Consider this a lesson, I said softly, almost gently. Celebration is sweet, until the guest of honor returns. I turned, my heels clicking on the marble floor, my empire behind me, untouched, intact. Daniel and Lydia remained seated, powerless, as the woman they thought was gone took back everything, with grace, precision, and absolute authority. From that day forward, Daniel never underestimated me again. Lydia never dared to claim what was not hers. And the empire, my empire, flourished under the only hands that deserved it. Because true power is quiet. True power is patient. True power waits for the right moment and strikes when the world least expects it. I looked out over the city skyline, lights flickering like stars. Boston had never felt bigger, more alive, more mine. I had survived. I had returned. I had conquered. And now, I was finally free. The empire reclaimed. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am alive. And I am unstoppable. The world thinks it knows me. They think they understand me. But what they saw before, that was only a shadow. The real Evelyn Carter, the boss, is finally in control. Boston sparkled below me, the city lights reflecting off the glass walls of my office. Every deal, every decision, every corner of my empire had been restored. Not just restored, strengthened. Daniel had been stripped of his authority. Lydia had been removed from any position of influence. And every single person who had doubted me learned, quietly, that underestimating me was the gravest mistake of their lives. I reflected on everything that had brought me here. The betrayal, the humiliation, the pain of watching the people I trusted celebrate my death. Each of those moments, each betrayal, had forged me into someone sharper, stronger, and wiser. From the outside, they saw a woman who had survived. From the inside, I felt like a force of nature. Every decision was calculated, precise. Every action designed to protect what was mine. Power wasn't about wealth alone. It wasn't about status, nor was it about revenge. It was about vision, patience, and rising when the world expected you to fall. I called a private meeting with the senior board members. My presence may have been absent, I began, but my vision never wavered. We have survived every challenge, endured every betrayal, and emerged stronger. From today onwards, we move forward under clear leadership. We move forward as a unified empire, and failure is not an option. Heads nodded. Respect, trust, and admiration shone in their eyes. Meanwhile, Daniel tried to rebuild his life. Lydia tried to recover her influence. But both had learned the same truth. The woman they thought was weak was the one who held all the power. And power, when wielded correctly, is absolute. Late at night, I stood alone on my balcony, city lights stretching endlessly before me. I thought of the past, the pain, the tears, the humiliation. And I realized every step, every setback, every betrayal
Had been necessary.
because without those moments, I wouldn't be who I am today. I whispered to the wind, almost to myself. They celebrated my death, but I rose. They underestimated me.
But now,
I am the boss, and no one, ever again, will forget it. From this moment, everything changed. The empire was mine, the power was mine, and the world would learn the name Evelyn Carter and fear and respect it in equal measure. Justice served. Daniel and Lydia had been given every opportunity to realize the truth. They had been warned, watched, and subtly contained.
but subtlety had not worked.
It was time for direct confrontation. I summoned them to the boardroom. Daniel's face went pale the moment he saw me walk in. Lydia's confident mask had completely crumbled. I stood tall, poised, radiating authority. "My name is Evelyn Carter," I said, letting each word land with precision. "You thought you could take everything from me. You thought my absence would make your victory permanent. But victory is never given to the arrogant." Daniel opened his mouth. Evelyn, I cut him off with a calm, piercing stare. "You celebrated my death. You paraded through my home as if it belonged to you. You thought the empire could be stolen with smiles and false confidence. You thought the boss was gone. You were wrong." Lydia tried to interject. It was just business. We didn't. Business. I echoed, voice rising. Business is trust. Business is respect. You violated both. And for that, there will be consequences. Daniel's hands shook. He realized the magnitude of his mistakes. Everything he had gained in my absence was meaningless. Lydia's tears fell freely. Every ounce of arrogance replaced with fear. Every plan undone. I walked slowly around the boardroom table. From today onwards, every decision you make, every move you attempt, will be under my watch. The empire you tried to claim will never be yours. Your power is gone. Your influence null. And your freedom? Controlled by the very woman you thought dead. Daniel tried one last desperate plea. "Please, Evelyn, we can work together." I shook my head.
No.
"You don't get to choose that anymore. You chose betrayal. You chose greed. You chose to celebrate someone's death. And now, you will live with the consequences." With that, I signed the final documents. All authority returned to me. Every asset, every division, every decision firmly in my control. Daniel and Lydia slumped in their chairs. The weight of reality had crushed them. For the first time, they understood the true cost of arrogance. I looked at them one last time. "Consider this your lesson. Some people may appear weak, powerless, but underestimate them at your own peril. The boss is here, and she always wins." By the end of the day, Daniel had no influence, no authority, and no trust left. Lydia had lost her position, her confidence, and her plans. I had reclaimed every inch of my empire and my dignity. The lesson was simple. Never underestimate the person you tried to destroy. And the person who had risen from the ashes? She had done so with patience, precision, and absolute power. The rise to global power. Boston had been mine. The city lights, the skyline, the empire I had built, all under my command. But power, real power, doesn't stop at one city. It reaches across borders, across oceans, across continents. I traveled to New York first. Meetings with international investors, board members, and influential leaders awaited me. They had heard whispers of Evelyn Carter's return from the dead. They were curious, cautious, and rightly so. Every handshake, every nod, every conversation was a reminder. I wasn't just back. I was unstoppable. From New York to London, from Dubai to Johannesburg, I expanded. Contracts were secured, partnerships strengthened, and alliances formed. Every deal carefully calculated, every move precise. Daniel and Lydia could only watch from afar, powerless, as the woman they once tried to erase grew stronger. Back in Boston, the empire was thriving. Employees who had feared change now respected me. Investors who doubted my survival now trusted my vision. And the world learned the name Evelyn Carter. Not as a wife, not as a victim, but as a global powerhouse. I stood in the penthouse overlooking the skyline, thinking of every betrayal, every insult, every false victory Daniel and Lydia had celebrated. And I smiled, because the woman they underestimated had risen higher than they could ever imagine. Daniel tried to reach out, to negotiate, to regain some foothold. Lydia tried to manipulate situations to her favor. But every move was anticipated, countered, and neutralized. They realized too late that the woman they once mocked had mastered strategy, patience, and power. From boardrooms in London to skyscrapers in Dubai, my empire was unstoppable. The woman who had been written off, humiliated, and betrayed was now a force the world could not ignore. Every decision, every action, every empire-building move was a message. Evelyn Carter is alive. Evelyn Carter is powerful. And Evelyn Carter always rises to be why the final lesson. The city lights of Boston sparkled below me like a sea of stars, each one reflecting a life, a decision, a moment that led to this point. I had survived betrayal. I had risen from humiliation. I had reclaimed everything they thought they had stolen. And now, I was at peace. Daniel and Lydia had been left with nothing but regret. The arrogance that had fueled their false celebration had crumbled under the weight of truth. They had learned the hardest lesson of all: never celebrate the downfall of someone you underestimate. I walked through my penthouse, now silent and serene. Every object, every room, every corner told a story. Of struggle, of patience, of a woman who had refused to be erased. I remembered the moments of pain, the nights spent recovering, the humiliation of seeing them celebrate my death. And I realized that every tear, every betrayal, every obstacle had been necessary, because, without them, I would not have become the woman I was today. I called a meeting with my global board. My presence may have been absent, but my vision never wavered. We have survived betrayal. We have endured humiliation. And we have emerged stronger than ever. Let this be a lesson, I said, voice calm but commanding. Power is never given. Respect is never demanded. It is earned, preserved, and defended. Daniel and Lydia had attempted to claim my life. They had attempted to celebrate my absence. And now the world had witnessed their failure. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to remind anyone. The empire, the legacy, the power, it spoke for itself. From Boston to New York, London, Dubai, and Johannesburg, my name echoed across boardrooms and skyscrapers. Evelyn Carter.
Alive.
Powerful. Unstoppable. And in the quiet moments, when the world slept, I would remember the lesson I had learned, the lesson the world now knew. Those who underestimate others, those who betray, and those who celebrate before the time will always face the reckoning. But the